officially, a pro-Osama bin Laden newspaper in Arabic out of London says the trip was canceled because the Saudi Arabian government vehemently protests what they consider to be unfair U.S. support for Israel in the conflict with the Palestinians. But the diplomatic sources want reassurances that there was in no way any indication in Saudi Arabia that they may have been aware of an impending attack on the United States. And some of these intelligence officials note that Osama bin Laden is, of course, originally a Saudi Arabian, although now he is believed to be in hiding in Afghanistan. An awful lot of potential coincidence, but all of these avenues being aggressively pursued. In addition to the Osama bin Laden supporters who are believed to be in Broward County as well as in Daytona Beach, investigators have already begun questioning ground crews in Boston and in New Jersey and at Dulles Airport, looking into a variety of possibilities, including the opportunity for co-conspirators on the ground to have smuggled in knives and other weapons and stowed them on the plane for the hijackers to use at a later date. And finally, again, potentially utterly unrelated coincidence, but something that investigators are looking at, so we share that with our viewers because it is being looked at as we speak. A Pakistani family that owns a baggage handling company at Dulles, which is also intended to be met with by the FBI tomorrow. John?
Carl Cameron, a wealth of information as usual from Washington as this investigation is pursued, Osama bin Laden or whoever. Carl, thanks a lot. So Linda, you know, one of the most interesting things Carl said of all that stuff was that evidently if you want to teach your terrorist student to fly a 757, you only have to pay $50,000 and send them to flight school.
Right. Because, after all, John Ashcroft is telling congressional leaders that the vectors with which these planes used for these planes to crash into these buildings were so precise. It's not an accident. Attorney General John Ashcroft saying that this had to be planned and simulated and rehearsed for months. That would lead one to believe that if they didn't attend some sort of U.S. flight school, that at least they had access to many hours in a very sophisticated flight simulator. Part of the ongoing investigation spearheaded by the Department of Justice, many field agents of the FBI having been dispatched already to airports around this country. We're going to continue our live coverage here, also letting you know that United Airlines, American Airlines have dispatched care teams, so to speak, to the airports, departure and arrival airports involved in these flights to try to assist the many families who are now suffering a terrible loss of life.
Yeah, and we continue to try to figure out how this happened. How did two planes get hijacked out of Boston and fly a few hundred miles to the west and then turn south and head to New York and hit the World Trade Center? Those two towers, as huge as they are a needle in a haystack over that great distance. Somebody knew how to fly those planes and knew how to fly them expertly and precisely in order to hit those trade towers exactly as they did today. With any luck, we're going to find out exactly what happened. We're going to take a very brief pause for Fox stations to join local news. And this is the Fox News Channel continuing coverage. Terrorism hits America and hits it big, as you well know. The World Trade Center in New York no longer exists. Both towers hit by hijacked airplanes today. All people on board the aircraft were killed, as well as perhaps thousands on the ground at the World Trade Center. The president now discussing thousands lost their lives today. And also an attack at the Pentagon in Washington, where some 850 people were working or believed to be working in a certain part of the Pentagon. Fox News correspondent Brian Wilson has been at the Pentagon, keeping an eye on exactly what is going on there. Brian, earlier we were talking about a range of anywhere from 100 to 850 people killed. How is it going now? Do we have a better idea?
Well, we're not going to know for some time exactly how those numbers are going to shape up. Let me tell you how they got there. We know there were about 65, 67 people on the plane. So those people, we don't believe any of those survived, of course, because that plane came in very fast, nose first, a deep dive, under full throttle, and there's not much left of the plane, and certainly no one survived that. But inside this building, as many as 850 people may have been working. Now, so the Arlington County Fire Department has made an estimate that the death toll in this part of the building could be, here at the Pentagon, between 100 and 800. So it's a big range. And they don't have any way of trying to narrow those numbers. They're giving us probably the best and the worst case scenarios in the 1 in 800 numbers. John, they're still fighting a fire here. They still have smoke coming from the Pentagon more than 12 hours after the attack. The plane went in at about 9:40 this morning, and we're still seeing smoke rising up from the building. The fire chief from Arlington County, Virginia, says that they hope to have the fire out by in the morning, and then they can hopefully start a search and rescue effort. Once they determine whether there are anybody to be recovered and rescued, then they will begin a recovery effort. But it's going to be a very, very long day today, and we are told the scene inside the building is indeed quite grisly. John?
Brian, let me ask you about something that has been reported, is being reported in tomorrow morning's Washington Post. And while it makes a lot of sense because of what people saw today, I wonder if you know how they would know this. The Post reports that the flight that took off from Dulles and eventually crashed into the Pentagon seemed to have been aimed at the White House at first, and then the plane suddenly diverted and went to the Pentagon. What do you know about that?
Here's one thing I do know. The flight plan to National Airport is only just a few seconds by jet to the White House. But it's awful hard to see the White House. It's tucked in among a bunch of trees. It's not a particularly large building. It is entirely possible that the pilot was headed toward the White House, could not find it, and then did a big circle around and came after a secondary target, which was very easy to see, and that would be the Pentagon. That's complete conjecture on my part. But I will tell you that security experts who've been watching these kind of things for many, many years and have been studying them for many, many years will tell you that was always the nightmare scenario, that a plane headed to National Airport on a routine route up the Potomac River would literally only have to divert a few seconds to be right into the White House. John?
Brian Wilson, outside the Pentagon, where firefighting still underway, rescue operations still underway, trying to figure out how many people were killed at the Pentagon today when the flight out of Dulles hijacked and then flown into the Pentagon. Apparently expert piloting going on there as the plane seemed to be headed to the White House, then diverted, aimed directly at the Pentagon and smashed into a huge fireball. That same sort of expert piloting seen in the two planes that headed towards the World Trade Center in New York City. They both took off out of Boston and flew a few hundred miles to hit both World Trade Center towers precisely. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Fox News coverage will continue live all night long with Lori Dew and Rick Fulbaum here to bring you up to date on all the events as they occur throughout the night. Rescue.
Oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one. Another plane just flew into the second tower. This has to be deliberate, folks.
I hope I live. I hope I live.
The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Beard.
And I'm Christine Devine. This is Fox News coverage of the tragedy in America. We are a changed nation tonight, convulsed to its core by the most horrific act of terrorism anywhere, ever. The weapons of destruction hijacked commercial airliners, used as battering rams to destroy our symbols of strength. 4 commercial airlines flights down, 2 in New York City, 1 in Pennsylvania, 1 at the Pentagon. Rick Leventhal live in New York City. More on this day. Rick.
Well, we are just a few blocks north of what's left of the World Trade Center on Church Street here in Lower Manhattan, surrounded now by police and fire and rescue workers and construction equipment preparing for the grisly task of going in, clearing the rubble, and recovering the dead. We can give you a closer look at the scene now using our mass cam. You're looking at Church Street directly in front of the World Trade Center at pieces of the towers that have fallen into the street. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people were buried when the first of the two towers collapsed some 15 hours ago. At least one of those people, a police officer, has now been rescued, and more survivors are believed trapped in that rubble, some of them calling relatives using cell phones, efforts being made to get them out, apparently out of the basement area of one of those towers. But 300 firefighters are missing and presumed dead, as are dozens of police officers and rescue workers, and there are estimates that the total number of people killed here could reach 10,000. One of New York's Twin Towers is ripped and burning, the target of a hijacked jet. And then, minutes later, another airliner hits the second tower of the World Trade Center, and a storm of wreckage and debris rains on crowds of people below. Dozens of workers trapped on high floors in the 110-story buildings fear there is no hope and leap to their deaths. But the horror is not over. As the buildings are evacuated and hundreds of firefighters and rescue personnel tend to the injured and secure the scene, the first tower collapses in a cloud of smoke and rubble, trapping and killing many on the ground. And then, just as the smoke clears and police and emergency workers start returning to the scene, the second tower comes crashing down.
There was a big shaking, some of the ceilings collapsed. Looks like there was a fire in the elevator shafts.
Everything fine till we got to the basement and then everything just fell in. I got trapped in there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, bags all around. Finally we fought our way out over the rubble.
Meanwhile, two more hijacked planes are headed for high-profile targets. One hits the Pentagon, the other crashes and burns outside Pittsburgh, possibly headed for Camp David.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Hours later, the fire still burns in the cratered remains of the World Trade Center, and a third building at the site, a 47-story tower, falls to earth. Lower Manhattan virtually locked down now. Bridge and tunnel traffic restricted outbound only, so vehicles are not being allowed into the city at this hour. And the police commissioner restricting all movements in the city south of 14th Street, saying only police and rescue personnel and residents are allowed to be in this area. Anyone who tries to get in who doesn't belong, he says, will in fact be arrested. Again, at first light, we expect the construction equipment to move in and the task of removing the bodies and clearing the rubble to begin. Certainly this day is one that will never be forgotten. September 11th, also known as 9/11. Reporting live in Lower Manhattan, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
If there is some good news here, it's this. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani confirming that, yes, they have pulled victims alive from the rubble tonight. There are reports that several buried victims have managed to make cell phone calls from the rubble.
We're still hopeful that we're gonna find people, and we have not given up hope that we're gonna be able to find some people.
We do know there are people in the building that are alive. We know that for a fact. I can't get into it right now, but we do know there are people in the building that are alive, and we're making every effort to get to them.
Police Chief Carrick saying he believes some of those still alive are members of the New York Police Department and the New York Fire Department.
Tonight, the city of New York is rising to the tremendous challenge presented by the tragedy. Reporter Rob DeCasio from our sister station WNYW filed this update from the hospital closest to the World Trade Center. And on this first night, the news is surprisingly good.
We are at the hospital which is closest to where the World Trade Center once stood, NYU's downtown hospital. And unfortunately, doctors tell us they have not seen a huge influx of patients. At last count, they tell us they are treating 300 wounded. About 20% of those are critical and 4 have died. But doctors tell us that the real story here is that there is not a huge influx of patients, that few seem to have not survived. An eerie calm has settled outside NYU Downtown Hospital. As darkness falls, truckloads of supplies, including new wheelchairs and beds, arrive. but there are no patients to fill them.
But unfortunately, we also know that it's tens of thousands of people who worked in the World Trade Center, and we're afraid that the people that we see here who survived this represent a small minority of those patients. And I guess the final counts will be available over the next few days.
Most that have been rushed here for help are the walking wounded, and doctors say most of those are emergency personnel.
I heard that there were several police officers who were able to extricate themselves from the rubble and so on, which I think we're all very happy to hear. So it's a bit unclear at this point in time about how many people left alive there are in the damage area.
Power is out inside the hospital, so the staff is only operating critical pieces of equipment. All day long, doctors tell me they have been waiting for this supposed second wave of people, and so far they have not seen it. In fact, just over the past 4 hours, they've only treated about 15 to 20 new patients. Those were emergency personnel. One doctor who came here to volunteer tells me that it's so depressing, so quiet, he's going home.
All right, nearly 1 hour after that assault in New York, terrorists struck again in our nation's capital. Their target this time, the Pentagon, and the men and women who work to protect our country from such terrorism. Mike Emanuel is live in Washington, D.C. with the latest there. Mike?
Well, Christine, Washington, D.C. is transformed into a war zone. We're hearing reports of as many as 800 people dead at the Pentagon. U.S. leaders tonight are trying to calm anxious Americans. The symbol of America's military strength, the Pentagon takes a direct hit from an act of terrorism, a commercial jet crashing into America's military brain trust. It's too early to know the number of dead and wounded. The president is promising punishment for those responsible for these terrorist acts.
I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Officials say the U.S. military is ready to act when it's necessary.
But make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
The attack on the Pentagon leads to evacuations of the White House and the U.S. Capitol. Much of the federal government is shut down. Commercial flights are canceled. Defense officials say despite the damage to the Pentagon, it is still functioning. Hours after the attack, the thoughts and prayers of many are focusing on the thousands of victims.
Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened.
Officials say the U.S. has not retaliated for the terrorist attacks so far. We can tell you the military is on high alert, watching the skies over Washington, D.C., and tonight the fire still burns at the Pentagon. We're live in Washington. I'm Mike Emanuel, Fox 11 News.
As the country stood in disbelief at the violence and destruction, more than an hour after the first plane crash, it became clear the terrorists were not finished. A fourth hijacked plane crashed into a wooded area of western Pennsylvania. 45 people were killed on the United Airlines flight heading to San Francisco from Newark Airport.
It was just coming down like it was going to land, but instead of landing, it just went nose straight into the ground.
Just moments before that crash, a man believed to be a passenger called authorities on his cell phone to tell them the plane had been hijacked. The passenger said, "We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb." As you've seen throughout the day, there were several amateur photographers walking the streets of New York as the planes hit the World Trade Center. They focused their cameras on the buildings and watched as the rubble came down.
I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Yeah. Can I get a toot? I'm just in a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
Later in the day, an emotional and united Congress condemned the acts of terrorism together on Capitol Hill.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Singing God Bless America on the steps of Congress, members of both parties showed solidarity and compassion in the wake of the violence. They vowed to move ahead with repairing the country and their agenda.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow.
That group appearance was also a symbol of their support for President Bush's leadership.
By mid-afternoon, some of the shock had turned to anger. There were cries for revenge, and for a brief time, it looked like it might be coming. A rocket attack lit up the night in Kabul, Afghanistan. There were several explosions at the airport. Afghanistan is the country that hosts and protects terrorist Osama bin Laden. But the U.S. quickly made it clear that we had nothing to do with that rocket strike. Afghanistan leaders believe it was the work of opposition rebels in that country.
LAX closed shortly after the disaster became apparent. What is normally one of the busiest airports in the world became a virtual ghost town. Linda Joyce joins us live with what happened today and what LAX may be like tomorrow. Linda.
John and Christine, this was a day like no other. We had briefings all day long, lots and lots of questions, very few answers, but I can tell you this. This airport is clean. LAX was swept by dogs, police, and they tell us it's ready for operations tomorrow. The third busiest airport in the world became a tomb today following the blasts in New York. Miles and miles of roadway empty. No traffic anywhere. Once the airport was closed, FBI and Los Angeles police searched every vehicle entering the grounds, and they searched every building with dogs. A suspicious package was found, and everyone reacts. Some even run for their lives. This turned out to be a false alarm, one of two here at LAX. Now, the big challenge for this airport, how to get 178 airplanes back in the air.
If you've ever been at any of the hub airports when they've had major weather disruptions in Chicago or Dallas or St. Louis, it takes 2 or 3 days to get those airports back into full operation. We expect that's what's going to happen nationwide.
And when the airport does reopen, prepare for a new flying experience with increased security measures.
There's going to be some new things here. There's going to be a lot of getting used to things and getting things wound up, from recovering from being closed. The other thing is, I think there'd be a strong indication that, at least in the very beginning, we would probably restrict the passengers only to go through the screening stations. And I think that just allow a lot of time for that.
It was a sight to behold, unlike any other. More than 2,000 flights a day land here. Not today, not now. The FAA will make the decision whether to open LAX tomorrow. It could be tomorrow morning. One more note, the plane behind me, it is just like the one that crashed into the tower in New York. Reporting live from LAX, I'm Linda Joyce, Fox 11 News.
Several family members of the crash victims are being counseled tonight near LAX. Tricia Tagasuki joining us now with more on that part of the coverage. Tricia.
Well, Christine, I'm just outside of the airport on Century Boulevard, and behind me are some of the hotels where family members of those victims on board those flights are being brought to be counseled. It has been a tough day all around for everyone. Tough day for those family members and loved ones, also for the crisis counselors themselves, and for the thousands of passengers who were stranded right here at LAX.
We're not telling you anything, nothing. Leave the families alone.
Family members and loved ones of the passengers on board the ill-fated flights were escorted to secure areas in and around the airport where counselors and crisis teams were waiting to help them cope with their loss.
What I have seen on their faces is grief and shock at what's happened. They've gone through a terrible tragedy and a horrible loss, and you can definitely tell it in their faces that it's hitting them.
What does it do to your heart?
Breaks it. Breaks it. It's painful.
Members of the clergy were also on hand to comfort family members.
You know, it's hard to speak about this, and it's a very tough time, and I think we just have to all hold together, and we'll be fine. I think everything else is too early to speak about.
When LAX was quickly shut down, it left many passengers stranded, not knowing what to do or where to go. The American Red Cross set up relief areas.
They don't seem to have something planned for whoever was supposed to take a flight.
We were lucky that it wasn't here in LA. Lucky that it was, I mean, I feel so bad for those families, you know, and I don't know. It's just hard to imagine.
Back here live outside of the airport along Century Boulevard, this is normally a very heavily traveled area. It is eerily quiet tonight. No traffic. You don't hear any noise in and around the airport area, unlike anything we've heard in the past. Now for an update on those stranded passengers, the Red Cross has set up a shelter for them if they needed to stay overnight. It is being set up at Morningside High School in Inglewood. That's the very latest from LAX. Tricia Takasugi, Fox 11 News.
With 3 of those ill-fated flights bound for Los Angeles, we will be reporting many stories of loved ones who won't be coming back. Jane Yamamoto is in Northridge with the story of one man whose loss leaves a giant hole. Jane.
Well, here at the Congregational Church of Northridge tonight, prayers going out for all of the victims in today's terrorist attacks, especially for one man who was from the Southland. Through music and prayer, a community comforts each other and reflects on the day of terror. 41-year-old Edmund Glazer was the chief financial officer of this Chatsworth-based telecommunications company. He was among the 81 passengers on American Airlines Flight 11 bound for Los Angeles that crashed into the World Trade Center.
Everybody is devastated.
Glazer's best friend and company CEO, Noam Lowton, says they were in New York just 2 months ago to ring the bell opening NASDAQ.
He helped us grow this company from about 100 people to 2,000 people or maybe more.
Glazer, a USC graduate with a business degree, joined MRV Communications in 1994. The company stretched from the United States to Europe and Israel. 3 years ago, Glazer moved to their Boston branch, relocating his wife and their son, Nathan.
He was always talking about Nathan and what Nathan will do when he grows up.
Colleague Diana Hayden says family came first for Glazer.
Family, I used to babysit for him when his child was born 4 years ago when they lived in the valley, he and his wife, and so it's just very difficult.
Business was shut down today, a wreath and ribbon placed in the front door to remember their friend.
I was in San Francisco yesterday and I spoke to him on the phone and I said, Edmund, I need you here. He was just a great man.
And Lowton also told me that he spoke to Edmund's wife today and says that she was worried about him and also worried about all the other victims' families. Live in Northridge, Jane Yamamoto, Fox 11 News.
More now on the victims. 2 more of the victims on the hijacked flight bound for Los Angeles work for the Los Angeles Kings, our hockey team. Tony Valdez joining us from the hockey team's training facility in El Segundo. Tony?
This was an important travel day, Christine, for a lot of members of the Kings organization. All of them headed here for El Segundo to the Health South Training Center because this is where the Kings training camp for the upcoming hockey season is scheduled to begin tomorrow morning.
We have a number of scouts that were traveling to Los Angeles today from all over the world.
As they checked in one by one because their flights had been canceled, it became obvious that collegiate scout Mark Blavis and director of scouting Ace Bailey were lost.
He was the type of person that had tremendous insights to the players. He liked to be around the players. He would have a good feel for what was going on in a locker room. And throughout his career, he was known as a winner. I think Ace has probably 7 Stanley Cups to his credit as well. Mark Bavis, just entering his 2nd season with us, with the Kings. Mark was a scout for us in the collegiate ranks. Again, an outstanding individual, did a great job for us, and our thoughts go to Mark's family back in Boston as well.
And after talking with the team at a meeting this afternoon about 5 o'clock, it was decided the training session, the training camp will go ahead as scheduled tomorrow morning. What's in doubt now is a preseason game, the very first one scheduled for Saturday night at Staples Center. The Kings organization as well as the National Hockey League going to get together and decide whether or not that should go forward, also considering what additional security precautions may be necessary, at least during the preseason. Reporting live from El Segundo, I'm Tony Valdez, Fox 11 News.
With a tragedy of this size and scope, in some way, all of us will be touched by the events. Our friends and colleagues at Fox Sports have suffered a loss. Tom Pecorelli was a camera operator working on the Fox Sports Net national show. He died in the crash of American Flight 11, the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Tower at 8:45 this morning. Tom had been with the show since it launched and was affectionately known as Uncle Tom to his friends. The cast and crew of the Emmy-winning show Frasier are mourning one of their producers killed in the attacks. David Angel and his wife were on board the hijacked American Airlines flight from Boston. The flight was one of the two that crashed into the World Trade Center.
Among those also killed in the Pentagon attack was Barbara Olson, a well-known political commentator for both Fox and CNN. Her husband, Ted, is America's Solicitor General, who argues cases before the Supreme Court. Reporter Tim O'Brien has this report on Barbara Olson, who called her husband from the plane and revealed how her plane was taken over by terrorists.
Olson, she called her husband twice during the hijacking to tell him the plane had been hijacked. And they lost contact once, and she called back. After the first call, Olson called the command center at the Justice Department to inform them of this hijacking, and they said they knew nothing about it but would track it down. Barbara Olson told Ted the following story, that all the passengers were herded to the back of the plane, including the flight personnel, including the pilot. And the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. You would think if there were a machine gun or any other kind of gun that she would have mentioned that. But the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. I asked Ted if she made any reference to nationality of the hijackers or any suspicions about the motive, and he said she made no reference to that at all. They didn't have a whole lot of time to talk. She said to Ted, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Somewhat typical of Barbara, a take-charge kind of person. But there was nothing they could do, and they're all trapped in the back of the plane.
All right, a look now at some phone numbers for relatives to call if you have a loved one who is on one of those 4 planes that went down today. 2 were from American Airlines. The number is 1-800-245-0999. 2 planes also going down from United Airlines. Their number is 1-800-932-8555. Governor Gray Davis saying California is taking every precaution to protect residents in the wake of the attacks. Security is tight across California. All state emergency services are fully deployed tonight and monitoring the state's livelihood, including the electrical grid, state water project, and a number of bridges. He says residents have a role to play as well in this matter.
And I want to urge all Californians to be calm, if they can, to spend this day with their family, and above all else, to say a prayer for the many victims of this dastardly act.
State workers were sent home today. Buildings were closed. The CHP commissioner says the states received threats, but none have been verified.
We're joined now by Dr. David Spiegel, UCLA political scientist. Doctor, thanks for joining us. And I want to ask you, anytime you have a catastrophic event like this, I presume there are some lessons to be learned. What have we learned today, and at what price?
Well, it's been a terrible price. I think if you think about the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall coming down, people wondered what the new world would be like. I'm afraid that what we learned today, the lesson we learned is this is the new world. And I think historians will remember it that way. On the one hand, you see the vulnerability of the United States, the vulnerability of our structures and our institutions to terrorist attack. And on the other hand, because of the media, in part, because of the nature of this tragedy, I think America was a family today. And that is what this new era makes possible. It's a globalized era. It's an era of high technology, but it's an era that makes us vulnerable. And I think that what we learned today is that we're going to have a new security policy. It may not necessarily be a security policy of high technology and missile defenses in the way that the Bush administration may have expected.
Stephen, we have heard about the possibility of terrorist attacks here in our country, but could you ever fathom something like this?
No, no one would have predicted of this dimension. Since 1993, when the first attack on the World Trade Towers, there were people who thought there might be some kind of effort, the likes of which we saw then, but nothing like what we saw today.
Are we more vulnerable than we thought we were?
Yes, obviously. And I think what it means is that we have to beef up our intelligence, we have to beef up our security measures, we have to certainly beef up our security at airports, we have to form alliances with friendly countries to work with us, and as the President said, we have to tell countries who harbor these terrorists, you know, then you're our enemy. You can't do that.
All right, Steven Spiegel, UCLA political scientist, we thank you for your perspective.
Thank you, Doctor. Officially, the Palestinians have condemned the attacks. Unofficially, there was this. Smiling Palestinians, many of them children, sang and danced through the streets of East Jerusalem. Thousands more demonstrated in Nablus on the West Bank, their resentment of Israel turning to glee over the pain inflicted on Israel's ally. But PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat said he was horrified by the attacks.
It is not only against the American people or against the American government. It is against the whole international human being. Unbelievable, unbelievable.
Arafat added his condolences and said of the victims, God help them, God help them, God help them. What about the reaction from the local Muslim community? Christina Gonzalez joins us from the Islamic Center with more. Christina.
Well, John, Christine, local Muslims definitely condemning what happened in New York. Also, those images you just saw of Palestinians also being condemned. But they're also fearful here, and they have good reason to be. Allahu Akbar. Prayers at the Islamic Center of Southern California for victims in New York.
We don't know how many people in there, but it's got to be a lot.
In the Southland, Muslims condemned the New York attacks.
We call upon all of our fellow Americans to stand together with us to bring the perpetrators of this heinous act to justice.
Many Muslims cringing at televised images of Palestinians celebrating.
Certainly that is a deplorable act. In our eyes, it's shocking to all of us.
And many of them are worried about the backlash.
Got a number of threats. You know, we'll get you back, and they've used much more explicit and obscene terms than that. We've had to close, we're you know, afraid for our children.
Muslim schools are closed and police are guarding mosques, but there's also a public show of support. From this interfaith service at Emmanuel Presbyterian to a surprise visit at the Islamic Center by actor Edward James Olmos, who spoke to Fox exclusively.
We are here in the United States, and we have Islamic people here and Muslim people here who are very, very much a part of our society and are very good and law-abiding.
I don't know. Maybe something terrible like this, something good will come out of it. It'll teach us that we got to address each other's condition. We don't live in this world alone.
There was a phone call that we received from some anonymous person who said that tell your women to take their scarves off. We will shoot them in the streets.
We don't even know yet what has happened. And for phone calls to be coming in, I think we have to start to understand that we are all human beings and all from one race, and that's the human race.
I should also tell you that all the threats that have been coming in here, the emails, the phone calls, are being forwarded to the FBI. At the Islamic Center in Southern California, I'm Christina Gonzalez, Fox 11 News.
In keeping with the peaceful message this afternoon, LA County Supervisor Yvonne Brathwaite-Burke urged people here to remain calm.
I also want to say to the citizens of Los Angeles, let's not take retribution against other innocent citizens within our communities because of their ethnicity or because we feel as though they look differently than from us. I would say to them, we want to look at this as an issue that is of worldwide significance, but we do not want to try to take it out on any of the people of our community.
Back to New York now for the latest on the terrorist attacks and the ongoing search for survivors. Rick Leventhal standing by once again in Manhattan with an update. Rick.
John, Christine, unfortunately I can't hear you, can't answer your questions, but I can give you a sense of what's happening here at this hour and certainly what happened when I arrived here more than 15 hours ago, shortly after 9 a.m. Both towers were still standing. They were on fire, though, and smoking, and there were crowds of people on every corner here in Lower Manhattan watching in shock and horror. Of course, less than an hour after that, both of the towers had collapsed, fallen to the ground, sending people running for cover. And since then, the situation here has been changing by the hour. At this point, there is no light here on Church Street except for that powered by generators or batteries because they have cut off the electricity and gas to this area to try and prevent further fires. There are still fires burning, although most of them are under control or subdued at this point. A hotel near the World Trade Center was on fire for much of the day. Another building next to it was burning and collapsed mid-afternoon, and there is still smoldering rubble at the scene there where the two towers came tumbling down many hours ago. In fact, we can give you a closer look now from our mass cam on top of the SAT truck at the area there in front of Church Street, right in front of the World Trade Center, what's left of it, and the large sculpture-like object you see in the middle of Church Street. Those are pieces of one of the towers that came raining down. Unfortunately, there were hundreds of rescue workers, firefighters, and police officers at the base of that tower, some of them inside the tower, when it collapsed. The latest word we have is that at least 300 firefighters are missing and presumed dead. Dozens of police officers also missing and presumed dead. The only bit of good news is that apparently one police officer was rescued from the rubble not long ago, and there is word that there may be more survivors trapped in the debris, in the rubble, possibly in the basement of what's left of one of those two buildings. Apparently they have been able to call relatives on cell phones. There are efforts underway to try and rescue people who may still be alive in there, but obviously those efforts hampered by the tons of debris and rubble still there, and also by smoking embers. They are putting water on the scene at this hour, and there are plans to go in there probably 7 a.m. Eastern time or so with the heavy equipment to start clearing some of that big debris out of the way and try and get to any possible survivors, and also start recovering the bodies of victims believed to number in the 10, possibly as many as 10,000. Of course, Lower Manhattan completely transformed at this point. The police commissioner has said that anyone who doesn't belong here should not be here, or they will be arrested. They're also restricting traffic into the city of Manhattan, asking everyone to stay away unless they absolutely have to be here. Reporting live in New York City, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
All right, there you have an update on New York City. Back now to our city. LA Police Chief Bernard Parks speaking just moments ago about the city's emergency operation efforts. Rory Marcus joining us with that story. Rory.
Christine, not only Chief Parks, but also Acting Mayor Padilla coming out to give us a briefing here just a few minutes ago, as they have done periodically this evening. They want to stress that things should return as close to normal as possible in Los Angeles tomorrow. Los Angeles City employees will be expected back to work tomorrow. Los Angeles Superior Court will be open, so if you have jury duty, you are expected to report to court, even though federal courthouses will remain closed. But buses will be running, schools will be open, trash will be picked up. However, Chief Parks did mention that Los Angeles does remain under tactical alert.
We are concentrating in the patrol effort on what we consider sensitive locations in our city's infrastructure, such as high-rise buildings, governmental facilities, also some of our reservoirs and aqueducts. We also have found in an update that we've had 26 bomb call-outs since this morning, all of which have proved to be false alarms, but yet we've investigated them and clearly shows that there are no bombs located in any of those calls.
There are no credible threats targeting the city of Los Angeles. We do not, at this point in time, have a threat to our safety.
Now, tomorrow they will send out mobile vans for law enforcement officials to actually donate blood. They will meet the police officers in the field tomorrow, and that will help them assist the law enforcement personnel that has been lost or is injured in New York. Reporting live from Parker Center, Rory Marcus, Fox 11 News.
All right, we'd like to give you right now some phone numbers for LA City Services should you need them. Take a look right now at your screen as we put them up. Here is the general number, LA City Services, 888-356-4661. This has been a day of tragedy for our nation, so if you feel you would like some crisis counseling, here's another number, 800-854-7771.
For security reasons and also out of respect, many of LA's entertainment events have been postponed or canceled. Here's a look at some of them. Sunday's Primetime Emmy Awards at the Shrine Auditorium, tonight's Latin Grammy Awards at the Forum, Madonna's performance at Staples Center, the Black Crows at the Greek Theater. The LA County Fair was closed for the day, so was the Hollywood Bowl. Tonight's stage shows at the Mark Taper Forum and the Amazon canceled. Tomorrow's Jewish Image Awards postponed. And Disneyland was closed today, but the parks will reopen tomorrow.
Several sporting events also canceled or postponed because of today's attacks. All 15 Major League Baseball games canceled, among them the Angels game in Anaheim, the Dodgers game in San Diego. All 3 college football games scheduled for Thursday night have been called off. Saturday's UCLA-Arizona State game at the Rose Bowl has been postponed. In fact, the Pac-10 Conference has canceled all sports through the weekend. The PGA canceled Thursday's start of the World Golf Championship. In soccer, the U.S. Women's Cup game scheduled for tonight between the U.S. and Japan canceled. Tomorrow night's Major League Soccer schedule was called off, including the Galaxy San Jose game at the Rose Bowl. The NFL, not sure yet whether they will play this Sunday. We'll keep you posted.
Like the rest of our area, Orange County is on a heightened state of alert tonight, and people across the county are reaching out to help our fellow citizens on the East Coast. Al Naipo is live in Santa Ana with more. Al.
And they're giving the ultimate gift. We're here at the American Red Cross office here in Santa Ana. It is still open late, and they are accepting donations. Blood donations. You can see just how busy it is right here. There's a great need, and there's been a great response. People just coming in and rolling up their sleeves.
They're giving of themselves, precious blood now in short supply in wake of the terrorist tragedies. The American Red Cross is pleading for donors. That, as specially trained Orange County firefighters in urban search and rescue are on alert and gearing up for possible deployment to New York or Washington, D.C. If called, they'll search the crumbled ruins of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, looking for survivors and the dead.
We're going to rescue people. Ultimately, there will be body recovery, but we're going to rescue people.
A few firefighters are veterans of the federal building bombing in Oklahoma City.
It's hard now to think that something would have gone above and beyond what we felt was ultimately devastating in Oklahoma City, but we found today that something more tragic and something of greater magnitude has occurred.
Meanwhile, Orange County is on alert, taking no chances. John Wayne Airport is shut down and evacuated. 270 daily departures and arrivals canceled.
As far as I know, we have not received any threats.
Local police agencies report receiving several terrorist threats, but all believed to be hoaxes.
First, we want to tell everybody in Orange County they're safe. They're as safe as they can be.
The Ronald Reagan Federal Building and courthouse was also evacuated and closed, its flags lowered to half-staff. Area churches held prayer vigils to remember the victims as parishioners sought answers to the deadly attacks.
And there are people, have always been people, who were motivated, they thought by God, but they weren't. They were motivated by the devil.
The happiest place on earth became silent. Disneyland and California Adventure theme parks barricaded and closed. The gates of Knott's Berry Farm are also closed. Anaheim Angels fans were also out of luck. The game canceled.
And back now live here at the Red Cross in Santa Ana. Some of the few people here remaining giving blood. Let me just sneak in here real good. No problem, real easy for you?
Yeah.
And I guess a good thing you felt compelled, you wanted to come in and help out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I woke up at 6 a.m. this morning and the stuff was going down, I sat there and I was numb. I was just in shock. And I felt like I needed to do something. And this was the most immediate thing I could do.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. You know, also, there is also a special number that especially residents of Orange County can call if they have information about any of the closures and other things that are going on. I believe we can show that number for you right now. That should be on your screen there. This is a public information hotline. That number, as you can see there, 714-628-7085. You can call that number. There is information there. There is someone there that can take your call and answer that information for you. As for the Red Cross, if you still want to donate blood, you can do so. Not tonight, but certainly give them a call tomorrow before going down. Don't just walk in because they need to schedule you in. Reporting live from Orange County, Santa Ana, I'm Al Naipo, Fox 11 News.
Okay, good point there. Also here in the Southland, with air travel at a standstill, many stranded travelers are flocking to rental car companies to keep their itinerary. Business was steady at rental car offices at Burbank Airport today after would-be passengers found out they would not take flight.
We're stuck here in Burbank. We need to get home to Sacramento. We were doing a real estate training course, and we were going to fly out of Southwest, but all the airlines are shut down. So we're renting a car and going to drive to Sacramento and with a one-way return.
And that woman says the car company waived the one-way drop-off fee for her in the wake of this tragedy.
As the East Coast scrambled to emergency response mode, the West Coast looked on with fear and horror. John Schwada has reaction from locals watching the violence unfold.
In Westwood, on Crenshaw Boulevard, in East L.A., people joined together in front of TV sets to watch the unfolding tragedy with horror, anger, and disbelief.
It's still coming to me, you know, it's still not even fully developed in my mind that this has even happened.
As TV images of devastation crowd into the student lounge at UCLA Law School, the students struggle with their emotions.
Almost no one's talking about law school now. Everybody's talking about what has happened this morning.
And among these budding lawyers, there's little talk of bringing those responsible to justice in a court of law.
We ought to retaliate in kind and treat this as if it were an act of war.
This is worse than Pearl Harbor, and if a foreign state is involved, then I would say a state of war exists between the United States and that country.
Across town at East LA College, there's shock that no one seems exempt from terrorism.
I didn't expect it to happen here. It's very scary.
Others say many priorities like social services for the poor may now have to take a back seat to national defense.
If it takes a cost, you know, to build better security for this nation, then by all means, you know.
In a South Central LA barbershop, customers and workers are stunned as Palestinians are seen on TV praising God for empowering the terrorist attacks.
I think that's terrible. I did see that the Palestinians celebrating. I really don't think that, you know, God intended for, you know, this to happen. He doesn't do things like this.
In Los Angeles, John Schwada, Fox 11 News.
While some businesses closed and sent workers home today, schools across the Southland stayed open. And as of now, the plan is for them to be open again tomorrow as well. Barbara Schroeder explains why.
Elementary school children playing, an oddly reassuring look at how life goes on in the face of tragedy. At middle schools, too, and high schools all across L.A., classes were in session. Some students were worried.
I just hope they don't come over here.
Many trying to wrap their minds around concepts they had only read about in history books until now.
Whoever doing it is got something wrong with their head or something.
My heart goes out to all the pilot families and all to the families on board.
Some parents pulled their children out of school today.
My daughter is very nervous, and I know she wouldn't be comfortable being in school and not knowing what's going on.
Emerson Middle School is the school closest to Westwood's Federal Building. Dozens of parents showed up early.
I heard the Federal Building was being evacuated, so I thought, you know, my kids are close. So I'm highly concerned. As a mom, a mother's instinct is to protect their kids.
Superintendent Roy Romer says schools will stay open.
These youngsters need to stay and focus on their materials. It's much better than being at home and seeing the repetition of this tragedy on television.
He wants parents to know security will be beefed up and crisis counselors will be available for parents, teachers, and kids.
The best thing parents can do is to talk with them, get a conversation going immediately, help them understand that tragedy occurs. We try very hard to prevent it, and we'll think about this one and try to prevent it even in a better way in the future. But help them know that we can be safe in this world.
As flags were lowered this afternoon at all schools, a memo went out to officials urging them to be role models for children as to how to handle this crisis. As Romer put it, a terrorist's game is to disrupt your life. Don't let them have an even greater victory. In Los Angeles, Barbara Schroeder, Fox 11 News.
Disruption and death in our nation's capital. One of those planes that crashed, as you know by now, went into the Pentagon building. We have a reporter standing by, Mike Emanuel, who can talk with us now about efforts tonight. Mike, what we're hearing is that there could be as many as 800 deaths in that Pentagon crash. What do you know? What are you hearing?
That's exactly what we're hearing as well, Christine, that the possibility of 800 people may be dead as a result of that crash at the Pentagon. When you consider that number, sure, it may be smaller compared to the numbers lost in New York City, but you compare those numbers, say, to the Oklahoma City bombing, those numbers are staggering. And so Pentagon crews working long hours trying to see if they can rescue their brothers and sisters who may be inside the building, working inside the building, maybe trapped inside the building, but fire officials who are working the scene saying it doesn't look good, feeling like there may be as many as 800 people. We have some tape shot this evening showing the rescue efforts, the cleanup efforts going on, trying to see if there are any people inside that can be rescued. but the fire still burns at the Pentagon so many hours after the crash. And of course, the devastating thing about these planes that were full of fuel heading to the West Coast is that they have a lot of fuel on them, and there's a lot to burn, and so that may hamper some of the efforts to try and rescue any possible survivors at this point.
Pentagon is not just a political target, it's a strategic target too. Is there any indication that that our military capabilities have been compromised by this?
John, officials are telling us that they do not believe those military capabilities have been hampered because there is a bunker beneath the Pentagon where Pentagon officials have been able to continue with their meetings throughout the day. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, apparently heard the crash, went to actually help rescue some of the victims, and then was taken down beneath the building and was able to conduct his business throughout the day from the bunker area underneath the Pentagon. We're understanding where the plane actually crashed was an area that was being renovated, and so it may not have been as full of people as it might ordinarily have been. So that may be some good news, but of course there was devastating damage done by that jet crashing into the Pentagon earlier today.
All right, Mike, what's happening there tonight? Are there fires still burning in the Pentagon building? Are there rescue efforts underway at night right now, or are they going to have to wait until morning when you have some light?
Christine, my understanding is the fire is still burning, and there are emergency crews working on it. We get a sense that some of the crews are going home to try to get some rest and try to continue with their efforts in the morning. And of course, they are holding out hope that maybe some of the people inside the building may still be alive, but we don't know how realistic that is at this hour.
Mike, the Pentagon's a big building and it's broken down in cells and rings and so forth, and also services and special categories. Which area, do you know which area, which services, which subspecialties may be most affected by this?
John, I'm told from those who are really well acquainted with that building, who've been in there for many, many years, that it was close to an area where they think the U.S. Army may have had a lot of its offices, and so the fear is that some of the casualties inside, or a lot of the casualties inside, may be Army personnel. Have not been able to confirm because the Pentagon's been kind of tight-lipped about their actual estimates of the casualties inside, but fire officials who are working it from the local area here saying they think as many as 800 people may be dead, and that is a devastating number.
All right, Mike Emanuel there live in D.C. at the site right there. We're looking right now at the Pentagon, hit by an airplane, one of 4 planes that crashed today. Military planes from our area are in the skies right now, flying east, carrying help. On board, search and rescue teams from March Air Force Base in Riverside, one of the many teams based here in Southern California, now gearing up to assist in the hunt for victims and survivors in New York. L.A. will play its part as the long and difficult search for victims continues. Specifically trained search and rescue experts from the city fire department, they're preparing now probably the most wrenching job they've ever faced. Sam Chulin has that part of the story.
This is 4850. Let's put that on now.
70 members of the Los Angeles City Fire Department's urban search and rescue team have quickly moved into action. They're airlifting 50,000 pounds of supplies and equipment by military aircraft to the East Coast.
The challenges are varied and many. I think if you saw that pancake collapse of both of those towers, certainly there are going to be issues that we have there. The issues we had at Oklahoma City pretty much approximated, but I'd multiply that by 100 times. And again, by 100 times more victims, it appears at this time.
What are you anticipating?
Carnage. I expected there to be a lot of body recovery and a lot of hard work with the rubbles that we're going to go through.
The Los Angeles contingent is also being joined by search and rescue teams from Riverside and Sacramento.
We anticipate the East Coast to be pretty chaotic, and so we will have to be self-sufficient.
The firefighters estimate they'll be in the New York area for at least 5 days, and as one puts it, whatever it takes. Dursa Teller is hopeful she and her dog will find survivors.
It's not a bombing, so it may be higher than the Oklahoma bombing, because with a pancake, it may be where areas they're more survival with the voids.
The LA Search and Rescue Team is flying from March Air Force Base in San Bernardino to McGraw Air Force Base near New York City, and they expect to be on scene quickly. In Sherman Oaks, Sam Chulin, Fox 11 News.
And joining us tonight is one of the country's foremost authorities on counterterrorism. Keith Adema spent more than a decade in our special forces. He has trained SWAT teams, Delta Force squads, and elite troops around the world. Welcome, Keith. And let me, I presume that once the smoke clears and all this, there are going to be some calls and recommendations for changes. What kind of changes do you think we may need to make?
I think one of the things we need to do is become more proactive rather than
response-orientated. Right now, we respond to crisis, and what we need to do is become proactive to where we can respond before the crisis occurs. And, that's probably one of the most important things that needs to develop and needs to happen in this country.
Earlier, we were talking about a plan that the U.S. used to have, and you were in favor of that very much. U.S.
Sky Marshals.
Sky Marshals. Talk about that, please.
The Sky Marshal program was an outstanding program that helped defeat the rash of hijackings we had for many, many years. It's where we deployed armed agents onto the airlines on the flights we found were high risk. Those agents were trained in special tactics and techniques to use on aircraft, special weapons and ammunition to use to defeat hijackings.
You mentioned earlier that if and when we find out who did this and where these people are, that that the cruise missiles may not be the weapon of choice. You seem to be saying that the special forces teams that the various services have might be a better weapon.
Well, we've seemed to have used cruise missiles before with little or no results. Spent a lot of money, and I think one of the reasons that our country does that is that we've been concerned with loss of friendly life in attempting to take retaliatory strikes, and a cruise missile is a safe, effective standoff way to inflict casualties and punishment upon those we deem responsible. That is not the way that it should be done, and I think the U.S. military is probably very closely looking at their other options, options that include more of a strategic, more of a tactical strike rather than a